It's Wednesday, it's just gone 4 o'clock, and this is the Alex Salmond phone-in on LBC. Parliament is on holiday again, but there are no shortage of burning issues. With European D-Day fast approaching, the Prime Minister is jetting around the continent. But does anyone have the slightest idea what he's banging on about? Has Cameron conned the royals into getting him out of yet another referendum hole? And why the Treasury talks in Scotland are hands-off, with their top negotiator, Chief Secretary Greg Hands, off to France for a mid-term break. Is he Francis Drake or Charlie Drake? But you set the agenda. You can call on anything you like, within reason, of course. Phone 0345 6060 973, text 84850, or tweet at LBC, or email alec@lbc.co.uk. This is the Alex Salmond phone-in with Ian Dale. LBC, leading Britain's conversation.
And don't forget, you can watch us live at lbc.co.uk. Charlie Drake or Francis Drake, what a line.
Yeah, only the older folk would understand that one, especially the Charlie Drake reference.
And we have the youngest demographic on LBC on this show, by the way.
Right,
so
okay.
You might want to know.
Don't worry, I'll rephrase for next week.
Let's go to the first caller.
It's Sam in Reading. What do you got to say, Sam?
Hello there. Good afternoon to you, Alex and Ian.
On you go.
Basically, what it's regarding is Boris Johnson. He's been dithering, and just have a quick question there. In your opinion, do you think Boris Johnson is dithering? He seems to be sitting on the fence with regards to the EU in or out referendum. What would you say to that?
Well, I don't think he's dithering, Sam. I think he's grandstanding. You know, he's showing a bit of leg. He's teasing because he wants to be the centre of attention. Now, I think an interesting question is, would Boris be a gigantic asset to either campaign? I mean, you know, if Boris goes for in, which I think the betting is, then, 26,000 London taxi drivers will go for out. And if he goes for out, then 26,000 London cabbies will go for in.
Led.
So I'm not certain he's the big asset that people are claiming, but I would think that right now, maybe exactly now, Sam, the Prime Minister has him smoozing in Downing Street, suggesting that preferment is only a few months away if he goes for in.
But people always think that politicians are very calculating. And do you think Boris is calculating about whatever he decides, how will that look for his leadership bid in the future?
Yes, I do. And I think one of Boris Johnson's biggest assets is that he's managed to be calculating without necessarily looking calculating, because he doesn't come across as the most incredibly organised.
When you calculate, you look calculating.
Well, that may be to my. I mean, Boris has got two advantages over me. One is the hair, and the other is the calculation and not looking calculating. But I still wonder if he's the asset that people seem to think. You know, Boris Johnson. Yeah, a lot more people like Boris Johnson than David Cameron, if you look at the polls. But is he the sort of person you would want leading a country or leading a campaign? I'm not so sure. But is he calculating? Almost certainly. Sam, what do you think?
Well, basically, I think he's quite good at sort of hiding the fact that he doesn't know much. And question. He sort of goes around all the houses and avoids the question, and then just makes you forget what the question was. So he's very good at misleading, and he's a bit of a magician, so I would say.
Well, Sam, I'll tell you something about Boris, and you must take this the right way. I was in a Glasgow restaurant, Gents, last evening, and there on the wall was a picture. This is true, a picture of Boris Johnson and the Bullington Club. I mean, I thought enough to put people off.
I hope you aimed properly.
Well, no, this is what they do in Glasgow.
Okay,
that's where the pictures of Boris are in Glasgow.
As a politician, I mean, obviously, politically, you have nothing very little in common with him. But as a politician, somebody that you see on the opposition side, do you admire him?
Well, I must confess, there is something about not being part of the grey mass of politics. You know, the men in grey kilts, as they used to call them in Scotland, or the men in grey suits, as they call them down here. But I rather agree with Sam. I think Boris has put a lot of effort, maybe successfully sometimes, into disguising what he doesn't know, and I'm not certain that people would regard him as a great asset in the Euro campaign, London cabbies or not.
Just on this issue, we've got a text from Barry in Redbridge who says, should Emma Thompson shut her cake hole about the EU, as the Sun's front page suggests? We talked about this on the programme yesterday.
Certainly not. I mean, if asked to choose between Emma Thompson and the Mail, who were also having a go at her, or the Sun, I think she's got absolutely every right to express her opinions. I mean, it's quite interesting. I mean, if you take the Mail in particular, they ran a lot of stuff about when various people were attacked when they expressed views against the ones that the Mail put forward. You know, when they were supporting the Mail's views. Then that was dreadful if they were attacked in the social media. I think they do exactly the same thing. The Mail and the Sun do exactly the same thing. Emma Thompson, she's absolutely entitled to express her view, and I must say I've got a bit of regard for celebrities. Also, Emma Thompson, I mean, they may not like what she says, but she always comes across as a bit cerebral in terms of celebrities. I mean, she seems to know what she's talking about.
What about Prince William? He made a speech yesterday, which some people interpreted as saying Britain should stay in the EU. I'm not sure how people could draw that conclusion from it, but they did. This isn't the first time that a royal has got themselves into trouble in intervening in politics, as you well know.
Yes, indeed. And again, there's a connect. I mean, I read I'm giving the impression of a Daily Mail reader. I actually read the Mail editorial this morning, when it said something like, if William had said this, meaning he was supporting the In campaign, it would be a constitutional outrage, absolutely dreadful. And yet the same newspaper was egging on Her Majesty the Queen to say something about the Scottish referendum only 18 months ago. So there seems to be a double standard. You know, William, it's dreadful if he said something in favour of staying in Europe, but of course it was a constitutional duty, according to the Mail, for the Queen to say something in Scotland. Now, the truth is that constitutional monarchies should stay out of referendum. I don't think for a minute that Her Majesty the Queen actually intervened in the Scottish referendum, but I'm interested in the double standards in the press. Actually, looking at William, what said yesterday, I didn't think that was much of an intervention either. Well,
David Cameron reckons she was purring at the result.
Yeah, well, I know that's not true. Well, I'll tell you why I know it's not true. The morning after, David Cameron, if you remember, kind of boasted to Michael Bloomberg and was apparently overheard in a microphone saying that. And it was a week after the referendum, I was asked to Balmoral the following day, where Her Majesty the Queen assured me it wasn't the case.
Asked or summoned?
Asked, not invited to Balmoral, where I was assured as First Minister that was certainly not the case. Now, I suppose, let's go at this. Who do I believe? Do I believe Her Majesty the Queen, Queen of Scots, or a Tory Prime Minister? OK, that's taken me 2 seconds. I believe Her Majesty the Queen. I'm backing the Queen.
OK, let's go to the next caller.
And next caller is Ilhan in Battersea. Did I get that pronunciation right?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about the meaningless of this ceasefire in Syria.
Well, it's going to be tested, isn't it, Ilhan? I mean,
do you think it's meaningless?
Well, I'm hoping it's not meaningless. Obviously, dreadful events this week. And what the United Nations rightly described as an international crime, the bombing of a hospital. And
who do you believe was behind that?
I don't know. I mean, the evidence seemed to point to Russian bombs. And the question really, of course, is intent. Was there intent to do that or not? There seems to be some doubt about that.
Because the problem is the Russians are using cluster bombs, aren't they, which are actually illegal.
Yeah. One thing I absolutely think should be avoided, because I can cite lots of examples of where hospital schools have been bombed by the Americans in Afghanistan. I think there have been collateral damage by British as well. Whoever does it, it's wrong.
But is this a war crime, as Andrew Mitchell says?
The United Nations are quite right to cite it as a war crime. Now, what I was going to say was, in the run-up to a ceasefire, you often get an intensification of action, of military action, because both sides are trying to gain as much ground as possible before the ceasefire. The test of the ceasefire will not be this week, it'll be Saturday, it'll be the day after the ceasefire. There is some hopeful signs that the Russian Foreign Minister and the American Secretary of State look like they both have invested some credibility on the ceasefire holding. And if that is the case, if the Secretary of State and Foreign Minister have done that, then frankly what President Assad says is going to be neither here nor there. We all have got to hope that ceasefire will hold, because the torment, the agony, the ordeal of the Syrian people, whoever's bombing them, cannot be allowed to go on.
But what should happen to Russia if they are found to have used cluster bombs here and have been found to have committed a war crime?
They should be taken to the international courts, as any country should do if it commits war crimes. Of course they should. Now, our next caller is Chris in Leytonstone. Chris.
Hi, good afternoon, Alex.
Good afternoon.
So my question is to you is, do you think there is a link between mass migration and extremism?
Yes, I do. I mean, I think the mass migration is a response to the events in the Middle East, particularly in Syria, but elsewhere. I think there's a very, very strong link, yeah.
And I mean, Theresa May has said that last night. What do you think, Chris?
I definitely think there's a link, because there's concrete evidence that shows that militants were using the flow of refugees to enter unnoticed, and reports show that the refugee centres were being specifically targeted by Islamic extremists.
Oh, I see the point you're making, Chris. You know, I think, of course, it can well be the case that militants and extremists could blend themselves into a flow of refugees. Of course, that's the case. But I think we'd be making a huge mistake if we believed, and I'm sure you're not saying, that the vast, overwhelming majority of people that we see in these desperate scenes are not genuinely fleeing for their lives. I mean, I think that is pretty evident. I mean, who on earth would risk their lives crossing the Mediterranean in the conditions they've been crossing unless they were in mortal terror?
But if we
I totally agree.
But if we believe that there is this link between mass migration and extremism, how should that inform the policy-making process in terms of how we deal with this subject? Well,
the policy-making process should be that people should be allowed to apply for asylum and treated and assessed in a proper and fair manner. And I don't think that's happening at the present moment. The scenes are pretty chaotic. Whether you look across Greece, actually Turkey's scenes are actually a bit more orderly in terms of the refugee.
But the problem is the numbers, isn't it?
Whether you look at Calais, you've got to assess people's claims for asylum in a manner. The other thing, of course, we should say, let's take the bombs in Paris. Let's take the atrocities in Paris. Then it is true that I think 2 of the perpetrators could be traced to having been active. I think 1 in Syria, and if I'm right, 1 in Libya. But it's also true that these were very much homegrown French people. These were people who weren't radicalised initially in the Middle East, but had been radicalised at home in France or had been staying in Belgium. So, yes, it's true, of course, that an extremist could merge himself into a flow of refugees. But it's also true that the overwhelming issue is what happens to our own young people and how they get radicalised. Yeah. And it is also true, incidentally, of the 7 plots, if you remember David Cameron was saying, that had been foiled, quite rightly, by the security forces, and congratulations to them. They were all plots which were inspired. That is to say, they were people reacting to events that they'd seen in the social media or propaganda, as opposed to planted terrorists. And we should remember that the vast majority of incidents are going to come from that source.
Now, don't forget, you can watch us live at lbc.co.uk. Let's go to the next caller.
And our next caller is Mattam in Edinburgh.
Hello.
You're not calling in as Robert the Bruce or Rob Roy then, Mattam?
No.
I had William Wallace last week, you see?
Yeah.
On you go.
All right. Excellent. Right. I'd like to have some couple of questions to you.
Sure, on you go.
About the immigration policies for Commonwealth countries. For a lot of my staff, what the problem they are having is to get their wife to join them in this country. They're finding it very difficult, and I think the UK government or the Home Office are terrorizing those people over there. I know a person who has spent in excess of £50,000 over the last 7 years to get his wife to join him in this country. And so I'd just like to have your view. Do the government should it make it harder or make it easier for people to join their partner in this country?
Well, I think easier. And I've got examples in my own constituency where there are individuals who are, without any question, in a genuine relationship and a genuine marriage who are being asked questions which I think are totally unreasonable, and where the evidence of the genuine nature of the relationship is overwhelming, and yet the Home Office are refusing right to remain. Now, if somebody can be supported in a genuine relationship, then I think they should be admitted. I think they should have right to remain. And, you know, and I know people have this view about immigration as a dreadful thing, but when you get down to cases and you meet these individuals and you see that what they're going through, and either the uncertainty of having somebody threatened with having to leave the country, or in the case that Matam cites of people trying to get into the country to reunite, then there's very, very few people, I think, are hard-hearted enough not to say these relationships should be allowed. And
but you say the system, it should be made easier. How would you do that without compromising the system entirely?
Well, you see, I think my own belief from the evidence I have in my constituency is the cases I've seen and the ones which have been successfully appealed, that often it seems to me that the Home Office officials are now so into this idea that everybody should be refused, they're almost doing that automatically. And people are getting through. It's a bit like some of the social security aspects at the present moment. Everybody gets refused, and then some people get back and appeal. I think we should, I don't think there is all that much wrong with the regulations, but I think the enforcement of the regulations just now has moved to the overzealous side of the equation. Okay. And the officials clearly are obeying what they believe are political orders from above. And I think Theresa May's got some target in mind, and her political future might be based on that target. What do you think, Martin?
Well, I think it's very unfair. I have great examples. For example, somebody put an application in. After 6 months, they say, we do not believe you're in a genuine relationship. Okay, that person has applied since then 7 times for the visa, and is keep getting refused for silly reasons. And within that times, the rules change, regulation change, and he has already spent excess of £50,000, and he's working for me at the moment. And I mean, the guy had to work.
You must pay him well.
2 jobs. No, I do pay him well. He had to do 2 jobs to make his wages up for 22,600 or something.
Yeah, and he'll be paying a lot of taxes, Matam, which is another. I mean, people should be treated fairly. But it's quite interesting. See, when you get down to individual cases, there are a few people who would disagree with you, and I'm really glad you ventilated that point, because it's not always the point we hear in the tabloid press and elsewhere. So well done to you, Martin. Our next caller is John in Leicester. What you got to say, John?
Oh, hello there. My question is, should the Catholic Church allow their priests to marry?
Well, I would say yes. And listen, I should say it's not my business to interfere in the doctrine of the Catholic Church.
But you're going to.
But I'm going to, because look, I'm on the programme, so I'm on the programme. I've been asked a question by John. One thing interests me about the celibacy rules. They are not essential to the faith. They can't be, because they were introduced as part of the Gregorian reforms about 1,000 years ago. And they were introduced for a very specific purpose. They were introduced as a kind of anti-corruption measure, because a lot of clerical appointments were becoming hereditary, and that people were favouring their families, and it was part of a process of trying to energise the church at that time. Therefore, it tells you, if the church could exist for 1,000 years without celibacy, then it quite clearly cannot be part. But look, that's just my opinion. I mean, I'm sure that His Holiness the Pope and the Catholic Church are well able to order their affairs. But I do actually think that perhaps it'd be great if they had a look at that aspect.
Are you a Catholic, John?
Yes, I am.
What do you think, John?
I think that it takes hundreds of years for changes in the Catholic Church, I know, but I don't see difficulty in a priest having a wife. The Pope is found to have a secret girlfriend recently, and he once, wrote a book about how to love a woman. Now, I've not read it from cover to cover, but some pages in it dealing with sexual things, he was very, very straightforward about it.
You might just have made it a bestseller, John.
Is that a book Mrs. Salmond would like you to read?
I've no idea, but I did actually see the programme that John is talking about, which was I think it was Edward Sturton. He did the programme. I thought it was a fascinating account. It should be said in behalf of St John Paul that there wasn't in the programme an allegation that this was a physical relationship, but clearly there had been a very strong emotional bond between His Holiness the Pope and an American lady who was also a philosopher. But I thought it was a fascinating, and I actually thought, although it dealt with subjects which perhaps some people would find uncomfortable, I thought it was actually done in rather... Did you see the programme, John?
No, I didn't. But
yeah, it was done... Well, you should have a look at it in the iPlayer thing. I mean, it's not as good as LBC, obviously, but it was one of the BBC's few successes. But I thought it was a good programme. I actually thought it was quite respectful in its way, and a very interesting programme.
We're getting an insight into what you do in the parliamentary research. Watch programmes about the Pope.
Well, it was well advertised. Anyway, Francis and Chelmsford's our next caller. Francis, what you got to say?
Good afternoon, Alex and Ian. Thanks for taking my call. I'm managing director of Netlaw Media, an events company. My question is surrounding disclosure. As we know, Matt Britton, the European Google, boss of Google, was in the press because he claimed he couldn't recall his salary when questioned by the Parliamentary Select Committee. Do you believe he should disclose his full salary? And secondly, as a public figure yourself, would you disclose your full salary?
Well, the answer to that is yes, I do, Francis, and I don't claim any sort of Boy Scout badge for it, because you have to in the parliamentary record, and so my salary is there in the Parliament. Not just my salary, but any payments from any source are detailed in the parliamentary record. And as far as the Google guy is concerned, yes, he should. Although, to be fair to him, he didn't say that he wouldn't do it. He said he would send it to the committee. But yeah, I mean, look, if you're in the firing line in front of a select committee, you would expect to, I think, be asked that question, and you'd be expected to come up with the answer. Francis, would you have had any difficulty if you'd been in front of the select committee?
I think if I got put in there, let's just say if I represent sort of a small, medium business, but if I was suddenly on the platform of a global player, one, to be perfectly frank, I might say, well, actually, it's none of your business how much I personally earn. However, what the dividends and what's in the public domain, with regards to tax and everything else, that's up for discussion. Because, perfectly frank, your salary, you should be able to obviously remember that was his, I just think that he was just sort of pushing them aside on that. But at the end of the day, it is none of their business as a boss and someone who is employed by a business to ensure that they, one, get further market share and continue on to success. But there is also the public interest in the tax.
Yeah, and I think you've got it exactly right. And I think if you're in the public eye, you no longer are a private citizen, and therefore don't have the same rights of privacy as other people.
Do you think MPs should have a right of privacy over their tax return? Because in America, if you stand for public office, I'm not sure whether you have to. I know presidential candidates always make public their tax return. There is a thinking in this country. I think John McDonnell has said that he thinks that MPs should do so here.
Yeah, I think that. Well, actually, one thing puzzled me. I mean, I think, yeah, fine. But the one thing puzzled me about it, I don't understand. I genuinely don't understand what would be in your tax return that's not in your parliamentary register, because the parliamentary register encompasses everything over a bare minimum payment. So one thing does really puzzle me about this: what is it in your tax return that's not in your parliamentary register?
Pension contributions, that sort of thing. I mean, you wouldn't put that in the register of members' interest, would you?
Well, the pension contributions for members of parliament, unless they've got private pensions, I suppose, are known as well. That's public information.
Obviously, MPs are getting a 10% pay rise. I think the salary's gone up to 74,000, something like that. A lot of MPs are declaring what they're going to do with it, giving it to charity. Have you decided?
Well, I tell you, Ian, you really put me on the spot. You're now forcing me to declare in the last calendar year, I devoted 55% of my parliamentary earnings between the Westminster Parliament and the Scottish Parliament to charity. Now, I'm really glad you've given me the opportunity to say that, because the next journalist who writes any story about my earnings, the question I'm going to ask them, and it'll be a fair question under the circumstances, is what percentage of their salary did they give to charity? You've got my percentage. I'll ask them.
OK, well, I'm not going to ask you.
Our next one is John in Glasgow. John, on you go.
Hi, Alex. It's about this continuing saga between John Swinney and the Treasury. I mean, do you not think it's all a bit of a pockle? They're taking all this money off and then they're giving money back as if it's some kind of special deal.
Now, for those of us who are not familiar with this argument, John, can you just tell us what it's all about?
And even better, John, explain to everybody what the glorious word pockle means.
Well, it's to do with the settlement going forward. It's how much money the Scottish Government is going to get to be able to run Scotland, and basically the Treasury. It's supposed to be in there just after the referendum. They said it was going to be everyone's going to be equal and fair, and it's going to be a fair settlement. But if the current way is just now, they're going to take away billions of pounds off Scotland, and then the Scottish Government was supposed to have to raise taxes and everything in Scotland to make it the money up. So the POCO is basically it's fixing a deal where somebody's getting a bad deal, somebody's got a good deal. In this case, Scotland's getting a bad deal. Now, in my opinion, just want what Alec talked about.
Well, John, that's a great explanation. The POCL for everyone is a diddle, an underhand financial manoeuvre. And do I believe the Treasury is trying to POCL Scotland? Absolutely. And do I believe that the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Greg Hands, that the hands-off man is off to France? He said it had to be settled this week, so he went to France for a half-term break. I think the Tories in Scotland are up in a rock and a hard place in this. For the referendum, they said, vote no, there'll be no financial disadvantage to Scotland, there'll be lots of extra powers. That was reinforced by the Smith Commission. It was then worked out by the principal of Glasgow University, prominent economist, that Scotland would lose up to £7 billion over the next 10 years with the arrangements that the Treasury were putting forward. That's subsequently been revised to £3 billion, which is less than £7 billion, but still a fair bit of change. And the problem for the Tory government is this is directly contrary to the pledges they made, the vow they made before the referendum, and what the Smith Commission said after the referendum. They're between a rock and a hard place. And Labour's idea, incidentally, of raising Scottish taxes to make up the difference, that's even dafter if that was possible. John Swinney should stick to his guns. He's your namesake, John, so you should I bet you think he should stick to his guns as well.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, why should we pick up £3 billion? That's a lot of money. There's only 5 million of us Scots.
And thanks for introducing the word POCL into this conversation,
We're
John.
very grateful for that. I shall try and use it throughout the rest of the programme.
Our next caller is Sharon in Kent. Sharon, on you go.
Hi, Alex. Alex, I'm the mother of 3 grown-up daughters, 2 of which did pole fitness as teenagers and still do. Should this excellent form of keeps it be demeaned or age restricted because people sexualise it?
Let me just explain that. Yesterday on the programme we did a phone-in on whether it was based on the fact that 2 8-year-old girls appeared on This Morning on ITV pole dancing. Now, Sharon's calling it pole fitness, so that's apparently another name for it. And I was asking people whether they thought it was appropriate for 8-year-old girls effectively to do pole dancing.
I would have to have seen the item. I think I didn't get up early enough to see it on
it's being taught in schools, apparently.
But, again, I mean, I see a lot of these things, and my view on these things is usually parental judgment. Nobody knows more about the presentation than a parent would, and no sensible parent is going to put their child into a compromising situation. If that's the parental judgment, then I think unless there's overwhelming evidence to the contrary,
we all know that pole dancing is associated with dodgy nightclubs. So would you be comfortable if you had an 8-year-old daughter?
No. Well, I don't have a daughter, so it's not a question I probably can answer.
Well, I don't have a daughter, but I can answer.
I would have to say, look, you can. Look, it depends, depends how your mind works. You can contextualise just about anything in an adverse way. That doesn't mean that things are beyond the bounds and shouldn't be done. But, unless you've got evidence that the parental judgment is somehow warped or wrong, I tend to think the parents are the best judge of these things. And I'm not in favour of an overzealous attitude to censorship. Our next caller is Rachel in Chesham.
Hiya. Just regarding this week with the Catholics, with the churches talking about how our organ donor, it's the Christian duty to be an organ donor. Do you think there should be a nationwide organ donating service where, unless you opt out for medical or religious reasons,
opt-out system? Do you think that's a good idea?
I didn't do it as First Minister. In fact, Richard Branson was one of the big campaigners for this, and I thought it had a lot of evidence. And Wales, of course, decided to do it. And
it's just come in December.
Just come in December. And I agonised over this for some time. One of the reasons in Scotland we had this huge information campaign which was resulting in an increase in voluntary donors, and I wanted to give that a time to go through. It came up in the Scottish Parliament very recently as well, and I'm kind of sympathetic to it. It sounds as if
looking back, you kind of wish you'd done it.
Maybe, I don't know. I mean, like, ifs and ands of pots and pans, or the other way around, I think it is. But look, it's difficult sometimes. But I would probably, it was a free vote in the Scottish Parliament, and I didn't get there because I was down here. But
is there anything else?
It's something to be said for it.
Is there anything else, looking back, you really wish that you'd done?
Oh, 100 things.
What's the main one?
Well, the main thing is I wish Scotland was independent.
Yeah, we take that as read. Anything else?
Obviously you look back, and the trouble is looking back, of course, you've got more knowledge now than you did then. And look, in these sort of things, you take the evidence you have, you take your decision and live with it, and that was a decision I took. But no doubt that's a matter which, as incidentally the Welsh experiment, let's call it that, comes into place, both the authorities, both in England and Scotland, will be well placed, which is incidentally a very good thing, to do things differently.
Now, Linda in Carshalton says, have you ever had your own "do you know who I am" moment? You'll know this is referring to Paul McCartney, who wasn't let into a Grammys party, apparently.
No, actually, Linda, I've been let into every single nightclub I've ever turned up at.
That doesn't surprise anybody. When was the last time you went to a nightclub?
No, I sneaked in through the windows. I'm not the world's greatest bopper.
When was the last time you went to a nightclub? I can't even
remember, to tell you the truth. But I'm sure that if I had gone to the Grammys, then I would have managed to impersonate somebody famous enough to be allowed in.
And what do you like to have a bop to?
Oh, I would say definitely ABBA. No question.
See, we're kindred spirits.
You and me both.
Yep, dancing queens. Now, Carolyn Beckenham finally, don't read too much into that, says, should women attending Ladies' Day at Aintree dress more aspirationally? Did you see this story?
No, I missed that entirely.
The owners of Aintree
advocate of horse racing.
The owners of Aintree Racecourse don't like the way some local women dress. They show a bit too much flesh, and they want them to dress more aspirationally. It's a class issue, isn't it?
Yeah, I think they should dress as they please. Look, one of the great joys of racing, and I'm a racing fan, is that racing is one of the sports which attracts people across the political spectrum. All forms of humanity are there, and I actually don't like the very regulated bits of racing like Royal Ascot. So I think that the more racing is free and easy, the better. And race meetings are occasions now. They're not just about the horses. They're not just about betting. They even have ABBA tribute groups at racing. Yes,
fantastic.
You must go there. So I'm for people within reason wearing what they like.
And just finally, I hear rumour that you might be doing a debate with Nigel Farage on the EU referendum.
Well, I'm hoping so. I want a mono, let's one-on-one. But Nigel kind of tweeted to say he wanted to bring help with him. Now, on this show...
Doesn't sound like it.
No, I know, I was so disappointed. I mean, this show we've already had the question of Chicken Donald, and we're not going to have Fearty Farage. I mean, for goodness sake, Nigel, get it together. This is a one-on-one we're talking about, not this bring along some of your squad or have a block debate.
Who would your
second
be?
Call.
If you had a sort of dual debate, who would your second be?
Well, I think it should be one-on-one. I really do, because we're going to get into debates where there's going to be a montage of people. I mean, David Cameron will do as few as he can get away with. That's like the referendum and the general election. You have to drag him into the television studios. But I'd never really put down Farage for being in that sort of meter. So, I think Nigel better have a think about it. We could have Douglas Carswell. Maybe Douglas Carswell could take Nigel's place. He's the UKIP MP. Incidentally, here's a fact you don't know about Douglas Carswell. His father, Douglas Carswell's father, was the inspiration for the last King of Scotland, the doctor in the last King of Scotland. Now, there's something. On that note, your next pub quiz.
We've learnt 2 words today: Fearty and Pockle. We'll try and get them in the programme over the next couple of hours. Alex Salmond, we look forward to seeing you next week as well. Wednesday at 4 every week here on LBC.
And the absolute anathema to everything I can imagine as a doctor would be asking someone for their credit card or their private healthcare insurance when they come to A&E or when they come in the door. It is not the right way, I believe, to do